I think one other thing to remember is that when we look back at historical examples, they don't always lend themselves to predicting the future as such. And for every industrial revolution out there, they are difficult to explain. And often when you look back, it's easy to explain why things happen the way they happen. But when you try to predict the future, it's actually much harder than that. And I've learned the hard way not to make predictions about the future.
This is the Definitely Uncertain podcast, brought to you by Gold Rock Capital. Each week, we look at how high net worth families can improve their lives, decisions, and investments in a deeply uncertain world. We always aim to provide practical information, even if we can't offer specific investment advice. This is the Definitely Uncertain podcast, and my name is Darren Rockman, and I am a partner at Gold Rock Capital, the more than 20-year-old multifamily office servicing high net worth families in Israel and around the world. And today on the podcast, Professor Savvas Papagiannidis, coming to us from Newcastle in the United Kingdom. Hi, Savvas.
Hi, Darren. Great to be on the podcast.
It's great to have you. So Savvas is the David Goldman Professor of Innovation and Enterprise at Newcastle University, where he's also a senior lecturer in management. He holds a PhD in theoretical physics and a second doctorate in business administration, and is a researcher who focuses on electronic business, digital technologies, and how they impact and transform organizations and societies alike. Savvas puts a strong emphasis on innovation, on new value creation, and also the exploitation of entrepreneurial activities. So Savvas, I'm fascinated by your background. How does a theoretical physicist end up as a professor of management at a business school?
Well, primarily due to a happy accident, I suppose. I mean, as a kid, I used to do well at science, so on visits following such a career after school and after university, I ended up studying theoretical physics at Newcastle and then read for a PhD in the area, where I spent primarily most of my time writing code in Fortran 77. 77 actually stands for the decade, well, the year that the protocol was established. So you can imagine how fascinating this was. But when I graduated, I started thinking what I was going to do with all those skills and experiences. And it just so happened that it was the time of the first dot-com boom and bust, unfortunately. So it was a very exciting time. I decided to start a couple of internet businesses. Clearly, I wasn't very successful. Otherwise, I would have not ended up being an academic. But in all seriousness, I think it was the realization that in order to be successful in businesses, certain things you can figure out as you're going along. By having a bit of background knowledge, skills related to management was going to be helpful. So I started thinking of doing an MBA, too expensive for someone who just graduated after 7 years of studies. So actually, for my sins, I decided to do a part-time doctorate in business administration, simply because it was easier to handle the payment. But that, again, drove me back into research. And one thing led to another. So I started as a teaching assistant at Newcastle, then promoted to lecturer, senior lecturer. And then eventually, as you said earlier, I became the David Goldman Professor of Innovation and Enterprise. So, a bit of an unusual story, but I think perhaps what is more interesting in that story is, and probably very relevant to our discussion today, is how flexible you can be when you have this kind of STEM skills that are typically associated with natural sciences, say maths, stats, and programming. Despite the challenges that natural science education had over the years, it's coming back with a might now, with data scientists physicists camouflage often as data scientists.
Right.
So I think, these kind of skills are really important to have and very relevant to AI, as we'll see later on.
Right. So you've set me up perfectly for the rest of the discussion. You and I met, though I'd heard much about you, you and I met for the first time recently at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, at an event where much of what was discussed was the impact of artificial intelligence and how that is now beginning to move its way through really all layers of business and society. So I think that, because this is a technical area that's moving into the mainstream, and we're still at the beginning. Let's start with a definition. Can you define in simple terms, for those not familiar, what is this concept of artificial intelligence?
As you can imagine, many different definitions, but I think it comes down to three important things, namely to think, learn, and make decisions like humans do. And training systems to do that is a task easier said than done. But effectively, it is all about providing the system with the data it requires to analyze that and come back with decisions that are not so obvious often because of the volume of the data involved. So in a nutshell, it's about making systems smarter. And I know the term smart has been used quite extensively over the last decade to describe everything to the point that it started losing its meaning. But for me, what that really means is to move away from predefining how the system will use the information to make the decision based on rules, effectively to automate some of the processes and to make the system more autonomous so that the system can actually be more flexible when it comes to, acting on the information that has been provided. And of course, there's a whole question about the term itself, artificial intelligence. What's the, difference between artificial and human intelligence, if there is such a thing? And what is intelligence as such? Typically, the way that we tend to think of AI these days, intelligence refers to mathematical algorithms, statistical training, to big volumes of data to come up with answers to questions. And those questions, of course, will be very domain specific, application specific, depending on what is it that you're trying to study. But it's a quite broad area, many different ways of potentially thinking about it. And I think often just talking about AI without looking at specific examples makes it very difficult for end users to relate to the concept and to see exactly what sort of benefits they'll get out of it.
Right. So maybe let's go there. What are you sort of seeing as some of the most innovative real world business applications of AI? Because we hear a lot about it, and I suppose most or many people have played around with ChatGPT and starting to think about how is it that this becomes a tool. What are you seeing from your vantage point as a researcher in this field?
Well, ChatGPT obviously has sparked much public interest in AI. It's one of the very first times that we had a direct experience with something that clearly had the AI label on it. But having said that, I think most end users will have had experiences with AI, even if they don't necessarily call it AI. So for instance, every time you talk to Siri or Alexa and give it a voice command, what you're effectively doing is interacting with the system. The system takes the data from whatever the voice command instructs it to do, has to make sense of that, understand what you're trying to ask it to do, then use all the data available in the background, and then hopefully execute the action appropriately. If you have ever been on Amazon or Netflix and any of these kind of services, the fact that we have recommendation systems are another example where machine learning can take a lot of data in and come back with an appropriate for your own preferences suggestion. So there are a lot of systems of this nature that we do interact with online. And when you start giving users examples, they say, yes, okay, I understand what you are getting at. But obviously, ChatGPT has changed that agenda completely. Everyone is now rushing to add AI to their own application. So I think the first instance we'll see more applications, AI emerging through existing applications as opposed to as being a standalone thing that you interact with. A good example of that may be Cortana's AI system that Microsoft obviously already has in its online provision. And also their plan to extend the Microsoft Office Suite to add Copilot, which will be an AI assistant and hopefully make us more productive, whatever that means. Right. But then, from a business perspective, I think it's also a very exciting area to look out, because it gives rise to things that sometimes you see in sci-fi movies, and now they start to become a bit of a reality. So, for instance, personalized marketing campaigns can be an example where businesses try to innovate with AI systems. They may take a lot of data about the customer, but also similar customers, create campaigns specifically for those customers and those instances that they are interacting with, provide targeted advertisement to entice customers, enhance the customer experience through, say, chatbots and virtual assistants. There are a number of different ways that you can automate and make the system more autonomous when they are interacting with the end customer, so that it makes it a little bit more personal. One thing we have to remember online, it's very convenient to be there and to say shop on emails, but actually there isn't that much interaction as such. So maybe that's one way of bridging that gap.
Right. There's a lot of hype around AI at the moment. We're hearing about it everywhere. Is there a historical analogy to AI? When you look back at sort of significant changes, and this is touted at the moment as one of the most significant changes, if not the most significant changes in the way that society and business operates. Can you see parallels, historical parallels?
I think we can obviously see many parallels with technology coming and disrupting the status quo. But I think in this case, AI is different in its ability to learn, adapt, and make decisions by itself. Typically, in the past, we were the operators of the technology. Here, we design and let the technology do what the technology needs to do. So I think AI has clearly the potential to make big changes to how we work and live our lives. It's going to have significant impact, however you say it. For that, I am convinced. I'm not entirely sure how exactly it will happen and whether it will be positive or negative. But as far as the impact is concerned, I think I'll put it as high as the internet revolution or even the industrial revolution.
Right.
But Darren, I think one other thing to remember is that when we look back at historical examples, they don't always lend themselves to predicting the future as such. And for every industrial revolution out there, they are difficult to explain and much debated alternative trajectories. And often when you look back, it's easy to explain why things happen the way they happen. But when you try to predict the future, it's actually much harder than that. And I've learned the hard way not to make predictions about the future.
Right.
But maybe if I just give one simple example of how difficult it is to make reliable predictions about the future. Only a couple of years ago, Facebook changed the name to Meta because everyone sort of expected that metaverses were going to take over the world. And gradually we're seeing everyone moving away from that sort of vision. Not that the technology is not progressing. So we have more VR, more AR, and everything else in between. But it hasn't picked up the way we expected it to be. ChatGPT changed completely the landscape. And suddenly, everything is in AI, including Facebook. I don't expect them to change the name again now to do something around GPT. But, you get the point that, it's very difficult to make predictions, not for the long term, but even for the short term sometimes.
Right. And nobody really uses a segue at all. So there's another one, which I suppose leads into my next question. There's the hype cycle, right? We all know about the hype cycle, where early on in a sort of revolutionary technologies life, there is this mass expectation. Afterwards, there's the sort of valley of disappointment, and then then the real applications begin. Where are we? Are we on that curve somewhere when it comes to AI? And if so, where are we?
So I think with regards to the hype cycle, we will probably see that AI diffuses much faster than other technologies because it will probably end up with many existing systems in the beginning. So I gave earlier on the example of Microsoft planning to embed AI in Microsoft Office. A software application is used daily by hundreds of millions of users out there. And as a result, it will instantly become available to all of them, or more or less instantly. I suppose there'll be a business model decision associated with that adoption decision there. But once that happens, AI will have a clear route to the market, to the end user. Other technologies have not benefited from such established adoption routes, and as a result, it makes it so much more difficult for end users to start interacting, get the knowledge, see how they're actually going to make use of this technology to create tangible benefit. and that takes time. So I think the augmentation will be the first point. And by that stage, once we have reached a matured level of that, we'll start seeing new, completely self-contained AI applications as well.
Right. Okay. One of your areas of research has been employee satisfaction and work-life balance. What do you think AI's impact is going to be? Or can we know what AI's impact is going to be on the employee experience?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think this is the point where I become a little bit more cynical about things, because everyone is very excited. I'm personally very excited about the technology, but I'm less excited about how we go about utilizing it on a day-to-day basis and what it means for the individuals. And a lot of the discussions around AI at the individual level is about job displacement. AI is coming to get your job. I think there is some truth in that, and it's a very natural first point to consider. But that's part of any industrial revolution. You know, before we had cars, we had horses pulling carts, and those kind of jobs were displaced, and that's part of the natural evolution of things. Where I am very excited about is AI, of course, augmenting and supporting users at the individual level. So, for instance, automation of repetitive tasks that no one should be doing. We're not robots. There must be better ways that we can spend our time, leading to, say, enhanced productivity and efficiency, leading to better decision making. Those type of positive effects hopefully will have an impact on a positive work engagement. You know, you engage more with your work, you feel better about you and what you're contributing to your organization, you feel better about as a professional. And hopefully that, in theory, is going to leave more time for you to do the things that really matter. And it will, in theory, again, reduce your workload. And then in theory, and in turn, will hopefully have an impact, a positive impact on work-life balance. And I said 3 times in theory, because what I suspect we'll end up doing is we'll have higher pressure to deliver more. Because we have these tools, we need to do more. And I think that will be really detrimental to work engagement, to satisfaction, and to our lives more generally. You know, we're not robots. We cannot sustain the same kind of pace that machines can. So we need to learn why it's important, focus our attention to that, focus our creative flow to that, and let machines do maybe the things that are more mundane.
Right. I remember my late father saying that the worst day in his professional career as a lawyer was the day he got a fax machine, because suddenly everything just sped up. And what you're saying is that's going to happen again on turbo.
Absolutely. But I'm also worried about the perceptions around work outputs. So, for instance, imagine that I produce an article for an academic paper. It's actually not a point of imagination. Something is very tangible right now. There's a lot of discussion about policy. And I use AI to write a research paper and to augment my writing. I have to declare that to the editors, but I don't have to declare, for instance, that I've used word processing or proofreader. So we got to accept those augmentations of our work as positive ones. But when it comes to AI, we don't want to be seen as using the system to produce work, because that has perceptions, that influences the perceptions around the quality of the work, whether it is mine, whether it is the same kind of quality that a human can produce. As if humans, we have all the answers, we always produce work that is of top quality, whether there's any bias in the work and so on. So I think there's going to be a shift in how we tend to approach work produced by AI in the short term, until we adjust and calibrate our expectations. I'm not sure how long that will take and how exactly it will work. But every time you involve humans at that kind of scale in any ICT system, it's always a recipe for disaster. So I'm bracing myself to see how things will develop in the next few months.
You raised an interesting issue, because one of the things that the digital revolution has created has been huge amounts of output, and the amount of information available, the amount of data available has just gone off the charts, and the ability of us humans to absorb that, analyze it, work with it has been, I think, a challenge across work environments. And it sounds from what you're saying that AI is only going to make it worse, because if you can produce that research paper all that much faster, the reader on the other side still has to use the same amount of time to absorb the information that's being served up. But there's just going to be so much more of it.
Or probably they use AI to summarize things. So then we end up
Right.
relying even more on writing
Right.
and consuming the material and the content. And that has, again, implications as to how we tend to think. Since I got my first mobile phone, I can hardly remember any numbers, including my own. While in the past, I could remember all those numbers. And it's a very simple example there. But one will imagine that our ability to absorb information, to process it, to critically think about it and analyze it, to come back with a summary of our own. These are really important skills that we should command and master and practice continuously. If we start relying on the machines to make these things happen for us, then I'll dare say, ask what is our role in all this?
So you mentioned the impact of social media and what it's done to society. That was perhaps an unexpected consequence of the online revolution of the last 30 years. Well, one of the unexpected consequences was the sort of increased social isolation and also an increased political polarization, which a lot of researchers and I think public policymakers are drawing a line straight to social media and the dynamics there. Do we have a way of you started to talk about extra work? What about other societal impacts that AI may have?
I think that there's going to be a number of potential things to watch out for. We tend to think as AI as being the only ICT system out there that has such big widespread impact, but everything we've experienced online has a similar impact. So as far as I'm concerned, technology is technology, and it is not about the technology, but how users go about utilizing it.
Right.
So social impact was supposed to democratize our societies, to get everyone involved, to give you a voice, and to give a voice to people who didn't have a voice. But what he actually ended up doing is creating so much noise that those who were the louder will be the ones who dominate the discussions. I think actually created much more damage than the promised good. But this is not a reflection of the technology as such. This is a reflection as to how we went about using the systems. Even when, we're looking at things that are more user-oriented, say, so for instance, online shopping, there are possibilities that the technology, instead of actually engage you more in the process, it ends up alienating you. So because we tend to do more online shopping these days for the convenience purposes, we end up not going out of the house. And
right.
a big part of shopping was that social dimension. You talk to the assistants, they smile at you, you do some small talk about the weather. It's obviously much better there than it is in the UK. So you probably have happier things
certainly
to share
in Newcastle.
about.
I've been to Newcastle. The weather there is nothing to talk about.
But you can see how by trying to become more efficient, more to reap those convenient benefits, you end up actually not spending time with friends and family at the mall, or even just interacting with the shop assistants. So I think we need to learn how to use digital technology more broadly, not just AI, more effectively. And it comes down to educating the users, to explaining to the users what the alternatives are, to give them, if you like, examples of good practice, to teaching them how to actually use the system effectively. We shouldn't take these things, simple things, for granted. Sometimes we assume that they're there, but they're not there. And then on the wider scale, there are a number of potential things we could do. Obviously, we do have ethical frameworks in place. We have guidelines for ethical design and development. We do impact assessment, long-term monitoring of the situation. But I think it all comes down to engaging all the stakeholders, especially those who rely more on the technology to express their views and to somehow synthesize that into a solution that works for everyone. I know it sounds quite idealistic, but if you start making compromises before you even try to get to that ideal place, even if you're never going to get to the ideal place, and even if you never manage to get everyone to agree what that looks like, at least you know that you have higher chances of achieving that. But it is a really big challenge.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons we learned from sort of social media over the last decade is that not everybody plays by the same ethical rules. And so whereas perhaps good actors, quote unquote, will meet those ethical guidelines and restrain themselves, in a digital world where, look at crypto and some of the fraudulent activity that's happened there, look at social media and the impact of foreign actors on elections. You've got plenty of examples where these open border systems draws the worst actors in, who then take advantage of those systems. So, are we going to see the same thing here?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And we're already seeing examples of it. I'll speak for higher education, if nothing else, where there are policies enacted to start declaring how you're using AI, because there are fears that people will use AI to get if you like an advantage when it comes to publishing research. But then how exactly do you enforce that? It's one thing having a policy and having the best intentions in the world, but actually demonizing the technology itself because there are bad actors out there who may not play by the same rules. I find that to be problematic because you're actually penalizing those who want to play by the rules and who want to make a good use of the technology. It is a very difficult thing to do. And as with all human history, I'm not sure what the solution is. Because
the solution is a lot more startups who are going to have to deal with these problems and find solutions for them, right?
Startups are always part of the solution, but I think the problems are fundamentally about human nature. It's not so much about the technology, because you can just remove all the technology. We still have the same problems, right?
Sure.
So I wish there was a simple button you can press and make it happen.
Right, but we also learned that you can kill a lot more people with a gun than you can with a slingshot. So, as technology advances, the ability to do bad, inflict damage also, increases.
Now, that's a fair point. And AI has that kind of potential effect and impact. We need to be aware of the dangers. We need to be aware of the challenges ahead. We need to be proactive about them. Everyone was caught by surprise, but by ChatGPT coming and taking the internet by storm, now I don't think there are excuses anymore. There were calls, for instance, to delay its progress, say, for 6 months until we figure out what we're going to do.
What the hell are we going to do with this thing?
Well, I've been thinking about even simpler things as to how am I going to use AI, say, in my assignments back at the university, and I still haven't figured out how to best do this. I don't think putting moratorium on AI is going to solve any problem. Instead, what we need to do is to start having more active public dialogues about how exactly those policies will form and continue evolving. Because I don't see this as a fire and forget type of approach. Once you have a policy on AI, that's it. Okay, we're done for the next 10 years. This is an area that's going to change so quickly, so fast, that we need to keep on, adapting to it for the foreseeable future.
Right. Okay. So when you and I met in Jerusalem, in a room full of academics, many of whom research AI, there was a clear split between the optimists and the pessimists. And I was sitting next to one fairly young researcher next to me who was sort of shaking her head in dismay about what the future is going to look like. So Savvas, where do you put yourself? Are you in the optimist camp or in the pessimist camp?
Well, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I see a lot of potential for AI. Everyone in academia, where it comes for research or for teaching and learning purposes, can use it to become more productive. I thoroughly believe that, and we've seen really good cases of that. In the teaching and learning space, there are so many things you can potentially do, like having chatbots to provide personalized answers to queries that students may have. If you are in a classroom of 300 students, you can appreciate how difficult it is to create that kind of personal rapport with students and answer individual questions. Sometimes the students even don't want to ask the questions because they feel shy or whatever. So it can open up new avenues. You can create more content, more quality content, hopefully, with more specialized, say, teaching cases. You can do data analytics with all the information that we got from the online virtual learning environments. So there are a number of potential good cases that you can see how higher education will benefit from it. I think a lot of the negatives that we tend to focus on relate to obviously assessment and demonstrating that you've mastered those skills and competencies. So for instance, in one of my modules, I asked students to apply theory to a practical case. And I've tried that question using GPT, and it did provide a reasonably good answer. I'll probably pass it. But I think the relative advantage of students going down that route of presenting work that GPT has created as their own is going to be short-lived. The moment everyone follows the same sort of approach, there's very small relative advantage. It produces more or less the same output. And even if we don't recognize it immediately, that the very first copy of that work, of the answer, was produced by AI, all the subsequent ones will look very similar to it. So you can actually tell who is using GPT to provide an answer. By having said all that, I think the bigger question is, what's the alternative? How do you actually engage with AI in the assessment process and make it an integral part? And for the last 6 months, I've been contemplating that question. And I have to say, I have more questions than answers right now. So, it's a really difficult one.
Well, in that case, Savvas, I think what we're going to need to do is bring you back on in 6 months' time and see if you've cracked it and see where you are on the optimism pessimism scale then.
Absolutely, and I suspect it will be a balance between the two. In fact, the best solution I've come to read so far is that you need more personal and closer interaction with the students to actually learn more about them, understand where they come from, who they are, how they think. So when you actually see the piece of work, you can see it as a reflection of the student who you have in front of you, as opposed to an AI, a response that came from an ICT. It's very difficult to do it when you have, big classes.
Well, another example of how AI is going to create more work for us rather than less.
Indeed, because now I have to do more things to just make sure that students play by the rules. Right?
There you go. So you're going to be Professor and Policeman. Savvas Papagiannidis, the David Goldman Professor of Innovation and Enterprise at Newcastle University. Thank you very much for being on Definitely Uncertain. It's been a really interesting and wide-ranging discussion, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody, for watching and listening, and more podcasts coming your way soon. Bye-bye.